Welcome to episode number 86 of the BeerSmith Podcast. It's early August 2014, and this week, Chris White, the president of White Labs, joins me to talk about yeast. Today's podcast is sponsored by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, the newest magazine on beer brewing. Every issue is packed with great advice on brewing techniques, beer styles, home brewing, and craft beer brewing. Go to beerandbrewing.com and use the offer code BeerSmith to get a 20% discount on their great new magazine for brewers from beerandbrewing.com. And also the American Homebrewers Association forum at homebrewersassociation.com. Join over 22,000 fellow brewers discussing beer, brewing, troubleshooting, and more. You can access it also from the Tapatalk app on your mobile device. The forum is free to join. Just go to homebrewersassociation.org to sign up today. And finally, BeerSmith Mobile for your phone, iPad, or tablet device. Create new beer recipes on the go, share them with friends, or search from tens of thousands of existing recipes on the BeerSmith cloud. BeerSmith Mobile is available for your iPhone, iPad, Android, or Kindle Fire device from iTunes, Google Play, or the Amazon App Store. Grab your copy today. And now let's move on to this week's episode. Today on the show, my guest is Dr. Chris White, founder and president of White Labs in San Diego. Chris is also the author of Yeast, A Practical Guide to Beer Fermentation in the Brewing Elements series. And Chris is recipient of the 2013 AHA Governing Committee, what I call the Lifetime Achievement Award. Chris, it's fantastic to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's fun to be on.
How have you been? Every time I talk to you, you seem to be on the road, and I guess you're coming from a hotel right now. Is that correct?
Yep. I'm in Chicago for teaching a Siebel class this week. My first time teaching at the new facility. Went by there yesterday. It looks great. It's a lot bigger and everything. So we've got this class is also a homebrew class. It's the one we do once a year for homebrewers. So I get to teach with Randy Mosher and Ray Daniels and Chris Graham for a week. So it's fun for me too.
You do quite a bit of teaching, don't you?
Yeah, that's seemed to grow more and more over the years. I guess more people getting into the hobby and more people getting into brewing and distilling and all of those things. So we've just gone more and more into education, and I enjoy that because I taught for a while at UCSD and still do and enjoy it.
Well, I wanted to jump right in and talk about some of the new things going on at White Labs, and I know you have some amazing new things to talk about, probably the biggest of which is the new pure pitch technology.
Yeah, it's something we've been working on for quite a few years, started thinking about it in 2008. But I've been consumed with thinking about how to grow yeast better and collect it and have it on the shelf since the beginning, in the early 90s when I started thinking about White Labs and how to ship yeast. So a new idea came to me in 2008, and we just started working on it and ready now to talk about it.
Well, what is the new pure pitch technology?
Well, at first it looks like a package change, the yeast won't be in a vial anymore. It'll be in what we call a flexible vessel, which is our fancy name for kind of a bag material. But it's a lot more than a package change. We just didn't stop one day filling vials and start filling something else like all yeast would be filled. We are growing it in a whole new way. So I thought instead of growing it in stainless and collecting the yeast and then concentrating and packaging and testing, which takes time and a lot of handling. What if we screw it in this film, in this plastic material, and then sealed the yeast right in the material after it concentrated? So we didn't have to handle it all, and then just segmented it into smaller pieces and sold it, shipped it directly. So like that. So that's we filed for a patent in that once we started working on it, basically to ship yeast in the same container it was grown in. And we thought, we started talking to one of the people working with me, Troels Prahl, in 2009. He had gone back to Denmark, but I talked to him in coming back to the States and working with me on it. And we thought, in 2009, we would have it all figured out. But it took a lot more effort because there was a lot of technology we had to develop that just wasn't there yet. It's still sort of not there yet for the rest of the industry.
So the new technology was 5 years in the making, right?
Yeah, 5 years in the making, and a lot of our company's effort, because in the meanwhile, we still needed to make yeast in the current way. The number of home brewers are growing. The number of strains they want is more. The number of commercial breweries and other things, fermentation industry is growing. So we were continuing to expand production and build a new facility in 2011 and more since then, and have this R&D project going on, which we started up in Davis in 2009. That's why we initially built a lab up there. And that's been nice. We still have it in a little interaction with the University of California, Davis, because we're in the same facility there. So that helped on the R&D side. Then a year ago, we switched all the yeast manufacturing over to this new system. So we've been making yeast in this new way for over a year, and that part has worked great. But we've been repackaging into our vials until we were ready to do it and ready to talk about it. And that's what we announced at the National Homebrew Conference this year in Michigan, because it was a fun place to announce it, even though it's still a few months off.
So that was in June. So the new packaging, let's just go through the production technique. You're actually producing it right in the flex cell packages?
Exactly. So what we're now calling the flex cell technology is produce it, and then that results in the pure pitch package. And so we produce it right in that flexible material. And so it's much larger sizes than those that you see on the video.
Yeah, I'm showing the package here.
Yeah. And those are some commercial sizes. And so we can produce anything, say, from a 35 mil homebrew size to a 2-liter size right now. But those are segmented out of a much larger film, really in a very large propagators. So we had to, we got rid of all of our stainless steel propagators, sold most of those off, and replaced them with all different machinery that we had made here in the States to grow them differently, and then to access them, because we have to now get at the bottom of the film in order to seal the yeast in it.
So in order to get them in this package, don't you have to concentrate them down quite a bit? Right.
So we concentrate the yeast kind of as we did before, through time and flocculation. But now, since it's in this flexible film, we can access it right in the bottom of that film and seal it without having to collect it and then concentrate it. So that's what we've had to do before. That's what everybody has to do. On the bottom of the propagator, you don't get it at the exact concentration you need it. Then you have to concentrate it more. You have to get it in the final concentration. Being in this film, we don't have to handle it now to get that concentration. We can see it. We can seal it right on the point that it needs to be, and then kind of get it even a little bit finer when we go to put it in the smaller sizes.
Very cool. You also stressed in some of the literature I read that the new process dramatically has a lot less impact on the environment, saves a lot of water too.
Right, because when we blow this film, we blow it sterile. And so then we don't have to go and use the same chemical cleaners and sanitizers on the stainless steel. Not just once, but several times, because you grow it in one stainless tank, then you collect it in another one, then you put it in another one, and until you get to the right concentration. So there's a lot of cleaning of tanks, a lot of chemical usage that we're now able to avoid. A lot less water consumption. And when I first announced it at White Labs several years ago to the rest of the employees, I got sort of a negative reaction, and I didn't understand that at the time. But what employees thought when I said these savings was that they might lose their jobs. And it never occurred to me, because I knew they weren't going to lose their jobs. In fact, we've had to hire a lot more people to do it, because all these little steps still are even though we're not handling the yeast in an exposed way, there's still a lot of things you still have to do to get the yeast sealed in that final vessel. So we've had to hire more people for it, and I knew that at the time. I just had to educate my staff a little bit on that and realize the sensitivities to people's jobs.
So we're going to start seeing the vials go away and the new flex packages come in. How's that going to be different from a homebrewer perspective? What's an average homebrewer going to see?
So they'll see a new package, and that's why I want to take a minute to explain that it comes from a whole new way of making yeast. And so they'll see this new package, but what's inside is going to be pretty similar. We grow the yeast on the same media. We put the same amount in, the same amount of sealed in that package. It's a tad bit more concentrated, but we still have the same target of 100 billion cells. We just like to squeeze a little bit more in if we can. What we do see is a higher just physiology in the yeast because of not handling it, and because that film can breathe CO2. Since we can design everything in this, that's one reason it's so flexible, and we call it the kind of that's helped term it the flex cell technology, because we could design that film to release a little CO2. Now, it's still going to have some in there. Yeast can pass even without carbohydrates from their own internal storage, but it'll slowly release that CO2. And so instead of damaging the yeast cells, it'll be released to the environment without, harming the yeast at all. So we're seeing longer shelf lives from a combination of handling and from that gas release. About half the loss of viability over time that we see right now in the vial. So
I'm showing some of the packaging here, and I guess so you say it's actually porous, or it actually breathes a little bit?
Yeah, it breathes a little bit of the CO2 gas.
I mean, is that a concern that you'd get anything in from the outside?
No, because it's still, from a gas perspective, that's all. And since it's still under pressure, it's not taking in any gas or oxygen.
So do the new packets still contain the same number of yeast cells? I think it was roughly 100 billion yeast cells in each package as the vials did.
Yep, same number of yeast, a little bit more, but definitely not less. What's funny is when you use it from this material, it sort of looks like less volume. And that's what we've noticed in our testing and people using it. Perhaps because you can't see it as much as you pour it out or something. That's just sort of a perception, like, oh, it seems like less, but it's exactly the same volume inside. It's even like a little bit more volume and a little bit more cells. There is a window on it, so that's kind of fun, because I always, I like that the vial, you can see the yeast, and I like a lot about the vial, but one of the things I liked about it was that you can see the yeast. So we wanted to retain that in this package. And since we can design, again, everything we wanted to about it, we were able to put a little window in there. So you can still see the yeast when it's on the shelf. You can, on the back side of it has a window. You can see it after you open it and pour it out. You do have to cut it. It doesn't have a tear slip or something like that, because that inner pouch is part of a big fermenter. It's got a really complex plastic or film material, so it's all cross-linked. So it's to tear, you have to be in one directional film. So we've learned a lot about film in this process. So since it's all cross-linked, you can't tear it, and that's because it's this propagator inside. So from a much larger piece. So you do have to cut it with some sanitized scissors.
So let's talk about how you'd actually use it. You'd have to, I guess, you sanitize probably the outside of the package first, right?
Yeah, you can sanitize the outside of the package, and then take some sanitized scissors, shake it up a little bit, cut it open, and then pour it out. We also design the film so the yeast doesn't stick to it, so it comes out of that film really easily. So the usage-wise is pretty similar. Instead of opening a cap, you're cutting a top.
Excellent. You mentioned longer shelf life is one advantage, and I know the old ones lost about roughly 20% of viability per month, and maybe lasted about 6 months. And you're saying these should last a lot longer, right?
Yeah. Well, we dated our the vials for a shelf life of 4 months, and they would retain viability pretty good. Actually, at those 4 months, they would still test over 50%. That's one way, the way we came out with the shelf life. But they certainly lose some vitality over time too, which is harder to quantitate. But what we've seen so far in the pure pitch is the same viability we're seeing at 4 months, we're seeing 6 to 8 months. So we know we're seeing a longer shelf life. We know we're seeing a longer vitality. We're not sure if we're going to put that on the package just yet, or release it and give that some time and more testing before we change what it says on the package. But so far from our testing, because we've been working for this so long, we've seen a lot a lot better viability over time and less gas buildup and things like that.
Fantastic. Well, let's talk about starters for a minute. I know you can make great beer with without a starter, but what are the advantages of moving to a higher pitch rate with a starter?
Well, the starter gets metabolism going. It doesn't usually increase a lot of cell count unless you take one of our packages, the vial or the new pure pitch. If you put that in about 2 liters starter, you can get some cell growth. If you put it in a half liter or liter, there's not much growth there, but there is some consumption of those carbohydrates and metabolism, which translates into a faster start time in fermentation. Generally the same final gravity. If the oxygen is the 8 to 10 ppm, whether a starter or not doesn't really affect the final gravity. If it does affect the final gravity, then the oxygen is probably not optimized. But I think there's never anything wrong with a starter as long as you don't introduce contamination. That's really the only risk. Yeast are happy with it, but if contamination is introduced, then it's probably introduced in the rest of the process too. So if you can keep everything else clean, you can probably make a good starter.
Excellent. I understand you pioneered the pure pitch technology in the commercial market. What's their reaction been to the new technology?
Reaction has been good. We were, concerned in that area with the same thing, that people like the package that commercial yeast comes in currently, or just until currently, which was mostly these 2-liter Nalgene bottles. But again, that was a lot of plastic material, and they
go ahead. Chris is working out of a hotel room here. He's having some challenges, I think, with the lighting.
Not as easy as my office. They have a light that likes to turn off in this room, so I guess environmental savings.
That's okay. We're just struggling with the video a little bit here, but that's all right. Okay.
So, people like the 2-liter bottles right now that we have in commercial packages. It has a good place to hold onto it. It has a cap, a real beefy cap, and they can pour it into their fermenters from the top or in line or something. So, the current one, now they've got to, the new one, the pure pitch, they've got to cut it and, walk up a ladder and things like that. So we've got some education.
I think this is some of the big packages I'm showing here on the screen, right?
Yeah, that's, I believe that the 1.5 and the 2-liter on the right, and should be a 500 ml on the left, but those are the 3 sizes. And out of those 3 sizes, we make all the sizes up to 50 barrel pitchable out of those. Then after that, right now we're going in larger vessels, larger, because those are in 20-liter bottles, over those sizes.
Sure.
But we'll get in the flex. We'll keep it from the flex cell part of it too, and get pure pitch on the larger sizes too eventually, hopefully within the year, because we don't want to expose any of the yeast we're making to the environment anymore. This is just a great way to handle yeast, and it's just better fermentation. So we want to get everything into it. And so far the reaction has been awesome from the commercial side. They're happy that if the yeast is healthier, they're happier. There's less shipping materials. I mean, they weigh significantly less with less plastic, so their shipping costs are coming down. And again, some less impact on the environment there. So we are just in the process right now of releasing it to commercial breweries, but we're still a few weeks away from everything being in the pure pitch sizes for commercial breweries. So when all of the commercial release is done, then we'll get focused on homebrew. But we wanted to announce that it's coming. And we have some equipment being made, because the homebrew needs a little bit of a little more high speed on making the smaller sizes, because there's so many more of them we have to make. So that
was one of the questions I had. When can we expect to see these in an average homebrew store?
We're saying the fall, which give us a little time, but it'll be still a couple months from now. So September, October, I think, is when you'll start seeing them. But even when we start one day making all pure pitch packages instead of vials, the stores are still going to have both for a while, because the week before they might have got a whole order of vials, and then those last for a few months. So you'll see it sort of all of a sudden. Pure Pitch will start showing up in the homebrew stores, and then over the next few months after that, there'll be a little bit of combination, but more and more Pure Pitch as the vials dwindle. And then middle of next year, I think all you'll see in the stores is Pure Pitch.
Are they going to have the same names and numbering systems, or are we going to have to learn a whole new set of names?
No, all the same names, numbers. We tried to add more things to the package itself that stores and customers, homebrewers have been asking for. Stores have wanted a UPC code for a long time because a lot of stores have got
that's been going on for 10 years or more now.
One out of a box that we ship them, of hundreds. So we finally added that for them. And a little bit more information on the package itself. But otherwise, the strain numbers are the same. It has the lot number like it did before. And that lot number, everybody can look up right now on our yeastman.com website. And you used to have to log in, but now you can just hit a button that says look up lot number. And when you can take any vial or any commercial package, take that lot number, punch it into Yeastman, and it'll give you the full QA/QC sheet that we produce for every lot.
Awesome.
Shows the purity and the cell count and the dates and things like that of what analysis was done.
Yeah, we didn't talk about it much, but I assume that by handling the yeast a lot less, you end up with a pure, cleaner yeast, right?
Right. So one of the things we have wanted to do is produce yeast outside of San Diego as this industry has grown. And it's such a difficult process that it's hard to do that out. Excuse me. But with this new process, we really felt like the QA/QC is so much easier to handle that we will be able to produce yeast outside of San Diego with this system. And so we're testing that in Davis. So we should have be producing yeast for sale by November. And even from the perspective of collecting the samples, you used to have to go into the propagators and pull a sample. Or pipette a sample out of a bottle or something like that. Now we can seal a piece from the large format, the concentrate flex vessel we collect from. We can seal a piece of that, take that to the lab and do the analysis. So again, we're not going into the culture and collecting anything. We're sealing a piece off. That's going to the lab for the analysis of the lot.
So ultimately, you're going to get better, pure yeast, I would imagine.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, I know you add new yeast strains every year. I was wondering, what are some of the new ones you're working on?
Well, we're always working with a lot of new strains because they take a long time to develop.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those are private strains. So breweries send us particular strains that they want us to isolate and work on. So that's a lot of what we do. And then we're going out and we're collecting a lot of yeast. So we have different Saison yeast that we're working on. Different Belgian style yeast in all sorts of different ways. Some strains from some more British style strains. We have a better working relationship now with the Yeast Culture Collection in London or outside of London. And we just did a collaboration with them. We're working on a paper that we published to Yeast recently on some analysis of their strains in our brewery and fermentation. So comparing the yeast strains and the beers they make. We're doing a big DNA project on yeast in collaboration with lots of people in San Diego and in Europe to see the full genome sequence of 200 yeast strains. So we're going to get to know a lot more about why yeast do what they do with this information.
Very cool. Well, I was wondering if you could talk for a minute about some of the new measuring you've got going on, where you can actually send in samples and get them measured or QC controlled, or I saw there's a number of options now.
Yeah, it's just something we thought of for a long time because as White Labs has grown, so has the analysis side of the business. So we have a full analysis lab where people are sending us beer samples and spirit samples and wine and stuff from all over. And I've been wondering how we can open that up to homebrewers that want analysis. But sending us samples can be sort of cumbersome to figure out and things if it's smaller batches of beer. and how do you involve the homebrew store? So what we came up with was these test kit sample boxes where the homebrew store can sell them, or we can sell them, and the homebrewer gets it. Basically, it has the instructions for filling the samples of beer, and the box comes back to us. And then we do the analysis in San Diego. So we can do almost anything, but the front of the box, as it's sold, if you fill your sample and you send it back, we test for IBUs and alcohol. Two things that you estimate from the recipe, but estimations are not always the real result. So to actually measure the alcohol, to measure the IBUs, is what comes with that sample kit. And then when you register it on Yeastman, because it needs to be registered before it comes to White Labs, so it follows into this testing system where we track it all with barcodes and not names and things in the lab analysis. You can add all sorts of other tests. So you can add esters, fusel alcohols. You can look at gluten. You can get the gluten level in a beer you make. All sorts of other things are options that you can add to it.
Fantastic. I was wondering if you could perhaps share an idea or a tip for getting better fermentation for homebrewers.
I think temperature control is really the best thing you can do. I mean, you have to get the pitching rate great and optimize the air, the amount of oxygen. Temperature control it makes such a big difference because yeast cells are so small and they're so sensitive to the temperature, and you really need cool temperatures for fermentation. So if there's a big difference in fermenting California ale yeast even at 68 degrees versus 74 degrees Fahrenheit. So having it as close to 68 Fahrenheit is the best. And Jamil Zanishev, which he co-wrote the Yeast Book with me, he has a great idea on that you warm up, you put the fermenter, instead of just putting it in a refrigerator, which kind of controls the temperature, but at a dramatic level. You put the fridge cooler, and then you put those heat kind of wraps on it. And then you control the temperature by heating it up in a cool space. And I have tried that, and it does work awesome.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, Chris, I was wondering if you might want to talk for just a minute about your book. You developed Yeast, a Practical Guide to Beer Fermentation with Jamil, and released it, I can't remember, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, 2010, actually.
So here's a picture of the book on Amazon, but I was wondering if you could say a few words.
Yeah, I just wanted it to be a resource on yeast that would last a long time. So I had kind of I started writing it a few years before 2010, and just try to put as much information on yeast in a practical way as I could, but it sounded pretty funny. So then Jamil came in and helped me finish it up and added a bunch of new content. So I think it reads pretty good. And it's still selling really well for the Brewers Association. And they were a little surprised by that, but I wasn't. I mean, I thought if we did a good job, it would do well. And Jamil really helped with that because it's so detail orientated, and with yeast you need to be specific and on so many details. So we put a lab chapter in there, for example, that is probably not used that much, but the people who do use it, I think, like it. The Brewers Association, the publications, weren't really that happy with us to put a lab chapter in because it added a whole bunch of pages.
This is part of their Brewing Elements series, where they have the 4 books on water. Well, 3 of them are out now, right? There's still 1 on malt, I think, we're waiting on, but on the 4 basic ingredients.
Yeah, I approached the Brewers Publications. Ray Daniels was doing it at the time, and about doing a yeast book. And at one point, and they said, "Hey, that's great," because they want to do a ingredients series. So since I was sort of the first one to approach them, we started with yeast. And then, water and hops have come out, and those are great books. I'm looking forward to the malt book. So then they'll have a series on all the main ingredients in beer: malt, yeast, water, and hops.
Well, thank you, Chris. I was wondering, last question is simply, do you have anything else to add?
Well, trying to do a lot of little classes now, like you mentioned. So sometimes they're through Siebel like this one, or just one day workshops. So I guess if people want to look for those in their areas, because we're doing them outside of San Diego now. We're doing a lot of classes in San Diego, and people are coming in for that. But we're doing one in Davis in a couple of weeks. We did one in Asheville, North Carolina, a couple of months ago, and we had people coming from all over for that, and Texas, and so those have been fun. And it's just looking for those. They're always on our website.
Well, thank you, Chris. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun.
So again, today my guest was Dr. Chris White, founder and president of White Labs in San Diego, also the author of Yeast, A Practical Guide to Beer Fermentation. Thanks again, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you to Chris White for appearing on this week's show, and thank you to our sponsors, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, the new magazine on beer brewing. Get a 20% discount on your subscription by going to beerandbrewing.com and using the discount code BeerSmith when you check out. And also the American Homebrewers Association forum at homebrewersassociation.org. Join 22,000 fellow brewers talking about beer and homebrewing. It's free to sign up for the forum, so join today. And finally, BeerSmith Mobile, available for Android, iPhone, iPad, and the Kindle Fire. Grab the BeerSmith mobile app from iTunes, Google Play, or the Amazon App Store today. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great brewing week.